Imagine being so popular you become canon twice. Every Dragon Ball fan knows who Broly is. He has 3 movies and appears in like basically every game. And now we have 2 more of him in Kale and Super Broly, both who take interesting approaches in adapting the character. But before we can break down these characters, we need to first understand who the original Broly was. Broly made his first appearance in 1993 in the Dragon Ball Z film Broly, the Legendary Super Saiyan. The film focused around Paragus' plan to get revenge on Vegeta, while Goku investigates the destruction of South Galaxy, both of which lead them to new planet Vegeta, but most importantly, Paragus' son, Broly. Broly doesn't exactly have a striking introduction, mostly portrayed as quiet and obedient, being rather thin and having a constant expression of sadness. Broly's persona is the result of his father's mind control, something Paragus viewed as a necessity to contain Broly's naturally violent behavior. The quiet side of Broly's character is intentionally underwhelming. The conflicting personas create a powerful contrast between forms, making his reveal more striking and memorable. However, it isn't a perfect approach. The first problem is that Broly and his father don't really have any kind of relationship. Paragus obviously fears Broly, but Broly doesn't appear to have strong feelings towards Paragus whatsoever. Their relationship doesn't really highlight anything interesting about Broly's character. The second thing is conflicting motivations. Paragus wants revenge on Vegeta for him and Broly being cast out, which is reasonable considering Saiyan's pride in their combat skills and ranking. Paragus feeling cheated by a system that divides low-class warriors and elites. But Paragus' plans don't really involve Broly. His entire scheme was to send Vegeta to a planet that would get hit by an asteroid. It would have been more poetic if his plan was to have Broly wipe out Vegeta, proving to the elites that they were wrong for mistreating them. Then there are Broly's motivations, which are, to put it lightly, f***ing stupid. Goku cried as a baby and now Broly wants revenge. Okay then. I think the idea they wanted to get across was Broly's shame in showing weakness, but it comes off as so petty and childish. It turns his transformation into one big temper tantrum. This gets memed on for a reason. But even more than that are how his motivations are separate from Paragus. It has nothing to do with the injustice they faced at the hands of King Vegeta, derailing the primary conflict the film had set up. How do you hold a grudge about crying and not getting stabbed? But the final issue comes from Broly's personality shift. He doesn't just become violent, he becomes sadistic. I get the purpose is to create contrast, but the transformation ends up feeling jarring. He becomes a different character rather than a natural extension of what came before. I get that this is because of mind control, but neither personality reveal anything much deeper about his character, existing separately rather than complementing each other. But this is the general idea of who Broly is. A character who comes off as quiet, obedient, and socially awkward one minute, but the next minute is violent and sadistic with a single-minded purpose to destroy. The core of Broly's character is the contrast between these two sides. So let's see how our first new Broly adapted these ideas. Kale made her first appearance in 2017 in the OP for Dragon Ball Super episode 77, but she wouldn't make her proper debut until episode 88. The episode focuses on Kaba recruiting Caulifla for the Universal Tournament arc. While there, he meets Caulifla's protege, Kale. Just like Broly, Kale is introduced as kind of a background character, immediately reading as timid, quiet, obedient, and a little awkward, while also being thin and having a similarly sad expression. This is the first area where I feel Kale is a little bit better than the original Broly. Broly's quiet, awkward side was forced, but this is Kale's natural personality. It shows her as someone who thinks very little of herself, giving her a clear arc to work towards. On top of that, she actually has relationships with other characters. Caulifla is the confident counterpart to Kale, who encourages her to believe in herself, someone that Kale admires and wants to meet the expectations of. Their relationship is like if Goku and Broly were friends, which is kind of ironic. Unfortunately, Kale being faithful to Broly's character is a double-edged sword, as she also shares many of his flaws. For starters, her motivations. There's nothing wrong with being inspired by people, but it's presented as though Kale's entire self-worth is dependent on Caulifla's opinion of her. Her character arc shows her having a temper tantrum until Caulifla gives her recognition. I do think it's clever how Goku was the trigger for Kale's outburst, but once again it comes off as an incredibly petty motivation. It makes her character arc feel childish instead of empowering. However, I do like how they decided to end Kale's arc by fusing her with Caulifla, coming to quite literally stand as her equal. But it would have worked a lot better if Kale came to recognize her strength on her own, since Kefla mostly feels like Caulifla but with green hair. Another problem Kale shares with Broly is her personality shift, once again seeming like a different character rather than a natural extension. There's nothing about Kale's behavior that suggests that this violent outburst makes sense. She's just taken over by power she can't control. However, it still kind of works in favor of her character arc. the idea that until she accepts herself, the power she has is something she will never control. Losing sight of herself shown through her lack of pupils, something she gets back after she regains confidence. I only wish that arc had a more empowering conclusion. It's also a shame that the anime version of Kale didn't get a backstory, explaining how she developed her personality as well as her connection to Caulifla. The manga added a little bit more depth by showing that Kale was originally alone until she was taken in by her. Lastly, I want to mention her character design. I get that Dragon Ball's style is simplicity, but I think this needed a little more work. Her outfit does not look right when she's transformed. Overall, Kale is not perfect. She adapts Broly in some positive ways, but also some negative ways. On the positive, her relationships, personality, and transformations all contribute to her character arc, taking the quiet side of Broly and turning it into a lack of self-worth, showing a character who learns how to have confidence in themselves. On the negative, her arc isn't handled perfectly, having outbursts for shallow reasons, lacking needed depth, and not being given the chance to control her power on her own, feeling like her self-worth is still dependent on someone else. Her arc could have been a lot better, but it still makes her character more coherent and meaningful than the original Broly. Now, let's look at Super Broly. Super Broly made his appearance in 2018 in the Dragon Ball Super film, Broly. The film recounts mostly the same tale as the original Broly, being born with a power level of over 10,000, then being cast out by King Vegeta. The backstory keeps many familiar elements, but makes some important changes that affect the characters. For starters, no crying Goku, which already makes him a million times better. But the most significant change is Broly's relationship with his father. Instead of making Broly a one-dimensional ball of anger, this time he's just a normal kid. His father still fears and controls him to an extent, but that control doesn't rob Broly of his free will. It allows them to have a real dynamic, making his father a more active participant in his life. Broly's personality traits are the result of his father's guidance. His quiet, obedient, and socially awkward personality is his normal personality, a result of controlling parenting and growing up with basically no other connections. His behavior isn't inherent, but developed. He acts this way out of choice because he cares about his father. Paragus raises Broly like a regular Saiyan, focusing on only battle while denying him any form of affection, which better reflects Paragus's original desire to prove Broly's strength as a warrior. Making this change to Broly adds so much depth to his character. He isn't a monster, he's just a lonely kid who wants to be cared about. This is even reflected in his character design, wearing the ear of an alien he once called his friend, remaking Broly's original design into something more meaningful. All of this turns him into a tragic and sympathetic character. Broly wants connection, so he obeys the only person who provides it, while Paragus wants to use Broly for poetic justice. Their motivations align with each other and it keeps the film more focused. Broly also develops relationships with other characters, Cheelai and Limo. Through Cheelai, we get to see a protective side to Broly, but also how he immediately responds to threatening situations with intimidation and violence. This leads into the best aspect of Broly's character, the fact that his violent nature is a natural extension of his personality. He isn't breaking free of mind control or suddenly developing sadistic behaviors. His upbringing taught him to repress his feelings. Trained as a Saiyan warrior while being all alone, not understanding how to express his emotions without being hurt. Broly has no healthy outlet for his pent-up aggression, reflected in his wrathful mode. Instead of transforming into a great ape, Broly contains that power, an ability that locks a part of himself away. It is literally the power of repression. Now, Broly does lose control of himself after he transforms into a legendary Super Saiyan, just like Kale and to an extent the original Broly, but the trigger is completely different. Broly only transforms after his father dies. His rampage is just his way of expressing grief. Violence is his only outlet for everything. Losing sight of himself reflected in his lack of pupils, just like Kale. It isn't until he almost dies that his eyes come back, showing that there is a part of himself that still clings to life, a hopeful side to his character, ultimately saved from his grief by his new connections, people who actually care about him, now given the opportunity to train in a healthy environment. A surprisingly positive take on the character. Super Broly is without a shadow of a doubt my favorite version of this character, taking elements of the original character while adding more depth, showing how he developed his personality traits through his relationships, while using his transformations to reflect his character, with an ending that feels hopeful. The original Broly was two different characters that were meant to contrast each other, but ultimately resulted in a shallow temper tantrum. Kale took those elements and tried to convey an arc of self-confidence, using her violent side as a reflection of her self-rejection, even if it never really felt like she grew past needing other people's approval. But Super Broly perfectly merged these two sides together, a lonely child who craved connection but could never have it. repressing his emotions as he struggled to be a warrior, eventually finding those who would accept him and offer him a new path. I actually cared about this Broly. Both Kale and Super Broly offer interesting takes on the original character. I certainly believe both are better, even if I only came out loving one of them. Since both characters are still part of the series, I'm curious to see what future developments might be waiting for them. But with all that being said, thank you for watching.